You Can Be a Stock Market Genius by Joel Greenblatt. Now, first of all, I want to say off the bat, I think it's a great book, but there are some negatives to the book that I think everyone should know before they buy or read the book, and so you know what you're getting, and I suppose how to fill those shortcomings yourself. Now, the title itself, I think Joel Greenblatt is very against the title. However, me personally, I think the book is that good that maybe if it doesn't earn that title, it gets quite close. Now, Joel Greenblatt himself is a very successful investor. He runs Gotham Capital. I would almost describe him, especially in the book, as a value investor. However, and this is big, I think even if you're a growth investor or whatever type of investor you are, you probably can take advantage, if not from all of the advice, a huge portion of it. And so, like I said, I think there's a lot of value in this book. And he himself, Joel Greenblatt, I think is quite funny, quite humorous, and a lot of his personality comes through the book. And so it's a very enjoyable read. I don't think it's dry at all. And I went through the book quite quickly. Now, follow the yellow brick road, the first thing in the table of contents, then hang a right. So already you're kind of seeing the personality. And here the chapter talks about maybe some ideas that go through the stock market. You know, everyone believes in, for example, diversification. Maybe he's going to talk about when it doesn't work, those types of things. Then he gets into some basics. Some of them are extremely basic, like don't trust anyone. But I think that these are all useful tidbits. It's not a very long chapter. If you don't know one of them, that alone is very valuable. And even if you know all of them, it's, like I said, an enjoyable enough read that I didn't mind. Now, the next chapter, and this is where I think we get much more to the value of the book, spin-offs, partial spin-offs, and rights offerings. Now, that might sound dry, but he writes it quite well. Now, spin-offs, first of all, what are we talking about? A large corporation, there's a small chunk of it that they want to separate into a different company. Why? Well, for example, maybe because that small company would do much better with its own management team, its own CEO, its own CFO, all these things. It would do much, much better. Maybe the major company is going to give some of its debt to the smaller company, and so it's also good for the major main company. Now, why is this chapter already going to be very useful in understanding the value of this book? Well, in my opinion, what he's really getting through to you here is that there's going to be special situations in a company where big investment firms can simply not take advantage. Why? They manage hundreds and millions and billions of dollars, and so these spin-offs might not be worth it for them. They might even likely have rules that don't allow them to be involved in the spin-offs. So for example, let's just take a random example in my head. You know, Apple computers, they make phones, they make all these things. However, they decide, there's some software that they want to spin off into its own company for whatever reason. Keynote, or iMovie, whatever it might be, that's going to be a separate company. Now, everyone who owns Apple is going to get this spin-off company as a second stock. Now, the big investment firms that own Apple, well, they might not be allowed to own that stock. Why? Because maybe that stock is only worth $50 million, the whole company as in its entirety. And so they're not allowed to own it. They're going to sell it. There's people who own Apple, maybe they don't even know much about whatever it might be, GarageBand or some piece of software, and they don't believe it in that much, and so they sell it off, they sell their stock. Lots of people are selling this stock. They're not really thinking about what value it can bring. Maybe they even think it'll be valuable like these investment firms, but they have no choice. They have to sell it. Whatever the case may be, this is a situation where you are getting a big advantage. You don't have those types of rules. And also, when you're dealing with $500 million or billions of dollars like he might be in Gotham Capital, for him to take a position in a company, he has to use a lot of money. He's not going to take, $100,000 in a company. He's going to put, $100 million in a company. And that might be more than this company's even worth. So he can't take advantage of these ideas anymore. And so that's why he put them in a book and sold them. That's the only way, I suppose, for him to make money off of them. So this is, I think, already getting to the point of the value of the book. And so you're not competing necessarily against investment firms. You're actually, amazingly enough, taking advantage of them. And so I think that's extremely valuable. Now, this will follow throughout all the examples, in my opinion, what I just said. But more importantly, what's going to follow in all the chapters is that really he'll give you a few pages outlining the general kind of idea behind the investment, why it's a good investment. But then he's going to give you example after example of how he did it. Where did he find the idea? How did he know it was a good idea? How did it turn out? And I think that's extremely useful for getting inside of someone who's very good at these investment ideas and seeing how their brain works and how they viewed them. I think that alone is extremely, extremely useful. And this chapter alone, I think, is worth the value of the book personally. And I think he makes that joke somewhere in the book, I'm sure. But nevertheless, we're going to move on to risk arbitrage and merger securities. And here, I think, once again, an amazing piece of advice. When it comes to risk arbitrage, he's going to give you examples where they did not work out in his favor. And kudos to him to telling you the examples that they don't work. They're quite interesting. They're quite funny. They're great stories. But like I said, they're very useful examples in my opinion. Merger securities, just the types of securities that come from a merger, and bankruptcy and restructuring. Now, once again, he's going to give you lots of examples in all of these areas. I'm just quickly going through the general idea. And when it comes to bankruptcy, he's really talking about investing in a company after bankruptcy. They've gotten rid of a lot of debt. It is riskier, as he mentions, simply because they got into debt and they went into bankruptcy for a reason, because they weren't a good company. Restructuring, that's going to be cases where the company does a major overhaul in their restructuring. You think that it's going to be a much more successful company with their new approach, and it's not just some small restructuring. And he gives you kind of, once again, these examples, and so you kind of learn from the examples. Recapitalization, substocks, leaps, warrants, and options. Here he mentions that these are much riskier. However, you can make a lot more money. And once again, he's going to give you lots of examples to all these things so you get an idea of how to take advantage of them yourself. Now, the biggest problem, in my opinion, and that is trying to be addressed by the next chapter, seeing the trees through the forest. And that's because he's giving you these examples, he's giving you these ideas of how to do the exact same things that he's done. And the problem is that, yes, that's very useful. And so you're getting inside of his head. However, not every single situation is going to be the same. In fact, there might be radically different. All of his examples are different. And so you might never run into something that's similar. And so you cannot use necessarily any of his ideas. Well, I shouldn't say ideas, but you can't use his examples as a recipe for success necessarily, because everything could change, or there might be one small difference or tons of differences. And so on one hand, yes, it's useful. You're getting inside of his head. You're seeing what he's thinking. On the other hand, in my opinion, it falls short in terms of giving you kind of the process of how to follow through in doing these things. Now, that might be simply because there is no process. Special situations are special. They're different. They're not common. And there is no real process, rhyme, or set system for understanding them, at least with his approach. And so I think that's the downfall of the book. I think that's the biggest negative. Me personally, I think one way of addressing this might have been to take his examples, give you a lot of the information that he saw, not just the key information, but a lot of the information, and then you kind of make a decision for yourself, and then he picks out the important points that he felt were important. And so maybe you get a little bit more training there, I suppose, and so you can do it a little bit better on your own. Now, this chapter, Seeing the Trees Through the Forest, I do think that he does try and give you some practical advice, like certain SEC forms that have to be filed if there's going to be a spin-off, things like this. Now, I don't know if it's outdated or not. What I would say is, sadly, this is the chapter that I think you need the most, and that's not fleshed out the most. Nevertheless, I think that the internet here is very useful. You can find people who work on special situations. There's groups. They give you more information. They might even give you ideas. And then you can use what you've learned throughout the book and try and take advantage and filter those ideas to what would be something that would make you a stock market genius, I suppose. And so in that way, it's not a failure to the book. I don't think that this is the most important. I think the most important part is the idea and the approach, and the examples, seeing inside of his head and knowing which ones I suppose are good and which ones are bad. I think extremely useful. However, to make it practical, I think this chapter needed to be fleshed out more. But like I said, you can kind of get those details and the most up-to-date details on the internet. I don't think that's a reason not to buy the book personally. I would still suggest to buy the book. But I do think you have to know that, and you have to be prepared for that. And you have to be prepared that this book almost will read much more like a story than an investment book. But like I said, you have to be prepared to getting into his head. Why is this a good idea or not? Now, all the fun's in getting there. This is a very, very short chapter, just some musings, I guess, on his idea of investing or life. It's just 2 or 3 pages. But nevertheless, I think that's the whole book. If you enjoyed this, you're still watching, I suppose, please like, comment, subscribe. Are you going to buy the book? Do you think it was a good book if you did buy it? Or, after you've read it, let me know if you found something that you actually disliked. I'm sure people would find it very useful if you come back and let us know what you thought. And thank you again so much for watching.